Hello and welcome to your channel for creative studies. So today we will be looking on to the paper analysis of BHIE 142 History of Modern East Asia, Japan from century 1868 to 1945. So this is the June 2022 term and examination paper, and this was of 3 hours and of 100 marks. So if you see the instructions in the paper itself, it says that attempt any 5 questions in about 400 words each. Attempt at least 2 questions from each section. All questions carry equal marks. So there are two sections, section 1 and section 2. So section 1 you have to do minimum 2, and section 2 you have to do minimum 2, that is 2 to 4 plus any one more you have to do out of 4 options that are given here. मतलब 4 plus 4 टोटल 8 क्वेश्चंस है. 8 क्वेश्चंस में से 5 क्वेश्चंस टोटल करने हैं. ठीक है, तो हम लोग अभी देखेंगे कि फर्स्ट क्वेश्चन क्या है जो यहाँ पर था. डिस्कस द मेन कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स ऑफ द टोकुगावा रूल इन जापान. Okay, so we'll look on to this, and if you see, this is of 20 marks. Okay, so you will find this question in unit number 2. Now if you see here that unit 2 is about the early modernity, the Tokugawa period, that is from 1600 to 1868. So as we know that Japan was not in contact with the outside world for many years, almost like 150 years. So during this Tokugawa period, that isolation, that the self isolation of not trading with other countries was broken. And as you can see that Tokugawa period or the daimyo Han system, it is about the bakufu or the central government. Okay, where the Han bakufu is the central government and Han is the फ्यूडल डोमेन. ठीक है, ये दो चीज़ बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है. इसके साथ साथ अगर आप देखोगे ब्लॉक 2 यूनिट 2 में, जो कि पेज 20 से स्टार्ट होता है, 20, 21 एंड 22. ओके, यहाँ पर द सिस्टम ऑफ ऑल्टरनेटिव अटेंडेंस, ये सब चीज़ के बारे में है. ठीक है, तो इसके बारे में आपको फर्स्ट क्वेश्चन इज फ्रॉम यूनिट 2. यहाँ से आपको देना पड़ेगा एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव स्ट्रक्चर क्या था, कैसा था, इसके बारे में आपको बताना है. ठीक है, तो ये चीज़ आपको बताना है कि टोकुगावा जो था रूल इन जापान, इसका कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स आपको फीचर्स आपको बताना है कि क्या था. ठीक है, इसके बाद हम लोग नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन में जाते हैं जो यहाँ पर पूछा गया था. लेट्स सी द नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन. इफ यू सी, in what ways did the Meiji Restoration lead to the creation of modern Japan? Okay, so this is in unit 3, page number 41, 42, 43. As you can see here that unit 3 subcontext 3.9, यहाँ पर आप देख सकते हो कि द मीजी रेस्टोरेशन का मतलब ये है कि देर इज अ लॉट ऑफ चेंजेस दैट आर गोइंग ऑन. ठीक है, तो यू कैन सी हियर फ्रॉम पेज नंबर 41. ओके, the Meiji Restoration is all about. Okay, so Meiji Restoration, this is from 3.9. Okay, and for this question you have to answer that what was the significance of 1868 and scholarly approaches to the Meiji Restoration. Okay, the Meiji Restoration, what was about it? It was about various changes and what were the impact after the Meiji Restoration, you have to tell. So if you see here, the Meiji Restoration, it says the return of power from the Bakufu to the emperor in the 1868 marks the Meiji Restoration. This was brought about by a coalition of daimyos led by Satsumu and Chosu, two of the major outside lords. The abdiction of Tokugawa Yoshinobu, original name Kiki, ruled by fall from 1866 to 1867, was announced by an imperial edict on January 1868. This marked the formal end of the long rule of the Tokugawa. तो Tokugawa rule के बाद क्या है? Meiji Restoration. Meiji Restoration में एक बहुत important changes होता है, and it was also known as the Enlightened rule. See here, it is the Enlightened rule or the Meiji, by which his reign 1868 to 1912. Very important these dates. Please mark it on that this is very important. The restoration or Ishin, the word in Japanese, there are many terms, so you have to use some Japanese terms here as well. In English, it's there because we are studying the history of Japan. So the restoration or Ishin, the word means renewal, as the event is known was carried out by some sections of the nobility and particularly the hands of Satsuma, Choshu, Heizen and Tosa. It was supported by sections of the samurai and rural rich who found the constraints of the Tokugawa system increasingly restrictive. These groups wished to share power with the Bakufu. Bakufu government was, if you remember, it was from the Tokugawa rule. Okay, so it was a carrying forward. From there, they carried forward, and there was many changes. And when foreign pressure made it difficult for the Bakufu or the Tokugawa rule, after that, that government that was formed, that was the Bakufu Han system. So to maintain the position, these groups asserted themselves. Foreign demand to open the treaty ports, as you remember that. This is very important, like why the foreign wanted to demand, they wanted to trade with the Japanese thing, so they wanted to open the ports so that they can trade openly. Okay, so this they wanted to open the treaty ports, and the Bakufu's vacillation allowed these groups to rally around the imperial court and demand that the Tokugawa hand back power to the emperor. In this demand, they were supported by the loyalists who genuinely wished to have an active imperial court. The Han, particularly Satsuma and Choshu, had initially been loggerheads, each leading their groups, but they came together and used the court to topple the Tokugawa Bakufu. As I told you, that the Tokugawa Bakufu Han system, if you see, that was the system that was prior to the Meiji Restoration. In 1854, the Treaty of Kanagawa, if you see, Kanagawa, was signed, and by 1859, Japan's foreign relations were established on the basis of unequal treaties, as in China. So there is a relation between China and Japan, because China was also facing simultaneously many of the pressures, political pressures. Same as well, China also made an isolation with the outside world. They almost didn't trade for many years as well. So if you see the King dynasty and the Qin dynasty, they actually locked totally. There was no trade outside world. Okay, so there was no trade, and that was a big problem, because that led to the non development of many things, and there was no outside connection. Okay, so for the growth of any country, there it requires proper amount of trade. So the trade is very important for any country. So if you see this Meiji Restoration, if you see this, there was a gunboat policy, there was the coming of black ships. If you see, that is very important. This is the just before the block. If you see, it's given there. Here the coming of black ships is very important. Okay, the coming of Perry here. Okay, that is in 3.2, where Commander Perry, along with his boats, gunboat theory, if you can see, there was a gunboat policy, and the Americans actually, the people from the US actually, British and all the many groups of fleets, they actually bought uh, huge fleets of armaments which were far superior from the Japanese uh, defense, and that led to the opening or the surrender of Japan in order to trade with the outside world, which was locked for almost like 150 years before the system that was there, that was the Tokugawa rule in Japan. And before, if you read the previous history as well, there was Heian period and many periods of there. So there was a lot of changes that was going on. So if you see, this was the second question that you have to write about it, that what was Meiji Restoration, what was the changes in between them, and what were the things that were essential during this time. This is in page number 41. Okay, page number 41, 42. Read this chapter for this particular answer, because Meiji Restoration is directly an impact of the Western pressure that was built in order by the troops of Commander Perry. Okay, so if you see, that was the time that Japan actually for the first time felt pressure. Earlier, before that, they actually tried to not to trade for many years in order to not get deviated or not get influenced by the westernized culture. Okay, next question we will see, that is number 3, discuss the political and economic implications. We will carry on from where we were discussing about. So the question was, discuss the political and economic implications of the allied occupation of Japan. This is in unit 14, and this is on page 185, 186 and 187. You can see here that this is unit 14, that is Japan. Okay, and here, as you can see, that these were the questions that were asked, that the allied occupation, discuss the political and economic implications of the allied occupation of Japan. So you can see this was the important part of the question that was asked, 14.2. So let's see on what is there. Okay, and this is the allied occupation. Japan was occupied by the allied forces under the provisions of the post dam declaration of 26 July 1945. Okay, this is very important. And however, in effect, the occupation was carried out by the United States. Okay, there was a small contingent of British and other Commonwealth forces. General Douglas MacArthur was appointed the supreme commander of the Allied Powers CAP. That is the supreme commander of the Allied Powers. That is a CAP by the US President Harry Truman. And MacArthur virtually ruled Japan through this, though this was done through the Japanese government, which was not disbanded. The Japanese Foreign Ministry set up a central liaison office which handled and processed SCAP directives. That is the supreme commander of the Allied powers. Okay, so this made it possible for the Japanese to modify and alter or even delay the implementation of this SCAP policy. So there was, indirectly, there was a Japan and other thing was also there. So the basic framework of SCAP policy was laid down by the United States in an initial post-surrender policy for Japan declared on the 29th August 1945. The policy had two major objectives. The two major objectives that was there was, one, it wanted to ensure that Japan would never again become a menace to the security of the United States or the world, because as you know, there was, in before, if you see, Japan after a lot of this westernization influence, they actually, if you see before this chapter, there was a lot of influence, and Japan actually tried to follow the imperial expansionist theory. मतलब इसका क्या मतलब है कि they actually defeated two of the, there were two very important wars. That was, one was Sino-Japanese war, that was in between China and Sino, uh, there was one Sino-Japanese war. Okay, that was between China and Japan. One of the territories from Japan annexed that in order to extend that territory, and there was one Russo-Japanese war. These are very two important wars that actually China, beg your pardon, that was Japan actually annexed the two states or the two places in order to expand their territory. So there was a expansionist theory. So after the modernization of Japan, they actually tried to extend the territory of the Japanese thing. So in between, if you see, there were many wars and there was constant pressure of US as well in order to not let Japan to supersede any more powerful countries as a whole. Okay, so they have a very a different kind of approach of extending. So they thought that in order to defend their territory, they have to expand their territory. So Japan actually expanded that policy. If you can see, that was the expansionist policy or the imperial expansion thing. Okay, so there is a question as well regarding this, that that's on section 2. Okay, so here you can see that there was some political implications as well. What was the political implication? They have asked that, and economic implications, that is in page number 185 and 186, 187. Okay, so this was all about what were the economic and in the form of economy as well as the political implication. What were the things that were the changes that were led after the United States actually put some restrictions on Japan's powers of how they will tackle up those things. So it was like a control over from US to Japan's way of tackling up things after these things. Okay, so this was all about that, and next we will be looking on to the short answer questions. Okay, so the short notes question that is there, question number 4, and this video will be of two parts. This is the first part of it. We will be doing the section 2 part in the next session, I will be actually explaining this last question for this session. That is, write short notes on any two of the following in about 200 words each. Now, the first is samurai. Samurai is a very important term, and if you see, this is, I think so many people know as well that what is a samurai. Okay. Okay. So as you can see here, we are in unit 1. Okay, there is like, it is not given in a particular one part. There are many definitions for samurai. There was a change of how samurai actually behaved as well. So in earlier ways, that was the instinctive was, it was a warrior class. Okay, they were like yodhas. Okay, and they used to protect. So if you see here, I will just tell you on these things. Okay, 1.7, unit 1.7, subcontext 1.7. Okay, and if you see, the revenues extracted from Osaka, Kyoto, Kinai were restricted and they supported a very small elite. By the 11th century, the Kinai region had been stripped off of extractable resources. It was against the background that by 1990, and if you see the last line of it, the samurai or warrior groups now emerged as a major group competing for the power. So samurai groups were like, they protected, and they had a um, huge role to play as a military or army. Okay, they were very good fighters. Okay, and if you see, samurai class was like a fighting class. Okay, so they used to fight for or defend the shoguns and all those things, daimyos. Okay, and they were the fighters, and there was a change as well. As I have told you, that the samurai was like a yodha or a warrior class. Okay, they used to defend, and they used to get money for it, for the work they used to do, and they used to fight wars as an army. Okay, so the samurai was a respectable job, and who were above them was the daimyo or the feudal lords. If you see, there was a daimyo hand system from the Tokugawa rule. So the daimyo were the feudal lords or the feudals. Okay, so for them the samurai used to work. Okay, so samurai was the warrior class in the Japanese stratum. Okay, so that's how the samurais used to work. Okay, and they had to protect the land. Next is the question. If you see, there are many definitions in between in the chapter as well. Here you will see the first way of samurai, in it's given here. Also there are various definitions in the book itself, you can find it out, but the main work of the samurai was like a warrior group. Okay, next we will be going on to the next question. Okay, that Anglo-French rivalry in Japan. Okay, this is in 3.7 unit 3. Okay, subcontext 3.7 unit 3, page 38 and 39. Okay, if you see, there is a British and French rivalry. The next question was Anglo-French rivalry in Japan. So if you see here, there is a 3.7. You will see, up to now it had been a question that Japan and foreigners, but soon Anglo-French rivalry began to intervene in the Japanese affairs, with the French gravitating towards the Bakufu. Okay, that was Bakufu. If you remember, Bakufu was from the Tokugawa rule. Okay, so Bakufu and the British supporting Satsuma and Choshu. The French connection began in 1864 when a Bakufu official was sent to Paris and Lyon Roches came to Japan. Roches gradually began to pursue an independent French policy rather than to work in concert with the other Western powers. He favored a strict policy to Japanese attacks on foreigners, advanced loans to the Bakufu to build the Yokosuka arsenal, and the idea of a joint Franco Bakufu trading company was also floated. So, as you can see, there was a change, and there was a change in approach. There was an Anglo French rivalry, okay, or the, you can also call it the British French rivalry in Japan. Okay, so it was taken from page 38, 39. The answer is there. So it is, you have to mention that what was the thing. The main was the French representative was Leon Roches. Okay, and what were the changes that was there in during this time? you can see there was many wars and rivalry as well. So this is very important as compared to the rivalries that were there. So it was a British French rivalry in Japan, or rather Anglo French rivalry. So British were also coming, as well as French were also trying to make changes in Japan, in order to, when the changes that led, when there was if you remember, there were trading there in Japan. So Japan, they all wanted to exploit the trade. If you see, many countries wanted to exploit the Japanese trade. So there was a rivalry just for this, and there were many things that they wanted to do in order to make this thing more, to have a capture over Japan. Let's go on to the next question, and that is Zaibatsu. Okay, Zaibatsu is in, if you see, this is also a rather open context question. यहाँ पर भी अगर आप देखोगे तो बहुत सारा चीज़ यहाँ पर दिया गया है, ठीक है. Zaibatsu is in subcontext 9.6, that is in 125 126. Okay, as you can see here, you will find this answer in unit 9, as well as in many other contexts as well, as you have seen in samurai as well, that they were the warrior class. And this question is also like an open context question, where you will find parts of it in many things. Okay, so if you see what is Zaibatsu, we will see here. Okay, and there is a very brief explanation of what the Jaibutsu were there, and what was the Zaibutsu power. Okay, so industrial concentration and the Zaibatsu, it is in page 125 126. Okay, so oligopoly refers to the situation when just a few producers are involved in the production of a particular commodity. During the interwar years, industrial monopoly in Japan increased. In the absence of competition, the product usually has a high price. The role of Zaibatsu during these years has a bearing on industrial concentration. So what they were mainly focused on, they were focused on mainly इंडस्ट्रियल कॉन्सेंट्रेशन. तो उन लोग इंडस्ट्रियल कॉन्सेंट्रेशन के ऊपर में मेनली फोकस करते थे. Zaibatsu refers to a certain large business houses. If you see this again, Zaibatsu refers to certain large business houses with very diverse operations and interests. There were four major Zaibatsu, या अगर आप देखोगे बिजनेस हाउसेस, जो लार्ज बिजनेस हाउस है, there were four major Zaibatsu or large business houses during this period, namely Mitsui, Mitsubishi, Sumitomo and Yasuda. ठीक है. Because of the financial difficulties in 1920s, the government instituted certain measures. ठीक है. अब ये क्या एक बहुत डिफिकल्टी हो रहा था ड्यूरिंग यहाँ पर वर्ल्ड वॉर का टाइम भी था. तो द रिजल्ट वाज द नंबर ऑफ बैंक्स डिक्लाइंड almost like 2285 in 1918 to 913 in 1930. By 1928 the big five banks, जो कि सबसे बड़े बैंक थे, मित्सुई, मित्सुबिशी, डाइशी, सुमिटोमो एंड यशुडा, held 34% of all deposits of the ordinary banks. 4 or 5 greatest banks were in control of Zaibatsu. तो Zaibatsu का कंट्रोल में 5 ग्रेटेस्ट बैंक्स में से 4 का कंट्रोल था. और फिर से मैं बोल रहा हूँ कि Zaibatsu इज द लार्ज बिजनेस हाउसेस. ठीक है, तो ये लार्ज बिजनेस हाउसेस थे जो कि जापान में थे. तो द फाइनेंशियल पावर ऑफ Zaibatsu increased a lot in process of consolidation. Banking and finance had become strategically important basis for industrial control by the Zaibatsu. ठीक है, तो यहाँ पर क्या था, दीज लार्ज बैंक्स रियली लेंड टू स्मॉल और मीडियम फर्म्स. इन लोगों का कुछ रूल्स था. ये बड़े बैंक्स, द बिग बैंक्स, बिकॉज ऑफ देयर इमेंस फाइनेंशियल पावर, कुड टारगेट पर्टिकुलर फर्म्स टू बी टेकन इनटू देयर होल्ड. ठीक है, उन लोग को होल्ड में रख लेते थे. फॉर इम्पोर्टेंटली, दे took care of the Zaibatsu related firms and gave them preferential treatment. ठीक है. Secondly, the bank funds could be used by a particular Zaibatsu और जो business firms जो बड़े बड़े थे, to widen the group's network of control. Thus, bank concentration led to ideal funds to be used for extension of Zaibatsu power. The Zaibatsu created a large number of firms in diverse fields. तो एक large number of power का influence हुआ. And thirdly, Zaibatsu related firms possessed powers of control which were much greater than their share of financial capital. Zaibatsu power achieved its peak in 1920s and early 1930s but declined afterwards. तो ये peak इसका एरिया का टाइम कब था, 1920 to 1930s. ओके, सो यहाँ पर Zaibatsu के बारे में बताया गया है. सो इकोनॉमिक फील्ड में तो ये कन्फाइंड नहीं था सिर्फ, इसका बहुत पॉलिटिक्स में भी इन्फ्लुएंस था, क्योंकि ये बिजनेस फैमिली से थे, तो बहुत पैसा जिसके पास है, जैसे बोलते हैं कि मनी इज़ वन ऑफ द मोस्ट इंपॉर्टेंट थिंग्स विच कंट्रोल थिंग्स, सो दिस इज़ ऑल अबाउट दैट। ठीक है, तो ये आपका पेज, इफ़ यू सी 125 and 126, सब कॉन्टेक्स्ट 9.6। The last question for today's session is this one: Japan and the Indian National Army. This is one of the important questions that came in the previous year as well. तो ये वाला हम लोग देखेंगे कि क्या है। And Indian National Army, as you know, this is related to Subhash Chandra Bose, so we will look into that. Now, as you can see here, that Japan supporting anti-colonial movements against the West. Okay, and here you will see the Japan and the Indian National Army. Okay, if you see here, this two, जापान एंड द इंडियन नेशनल आर्मी INA। ठीक है, तो यहाँ पर ये बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है। ठीक है, दिस इज ऑन सब कॉन्टेक्स्ट 12.6 एंड इन पेज नंबर 163, 164 एंड 165। ओके, तो यहाँ पर क्या है, इट इज़ द कॉन्टेक्स्ट ऑफ द जापान सपोर्टिंग फॉर इंडिया फाइटिंग फॉर इंडियन इंडिपेंडेंस टुक प्लेस, जहाँ पर अगर आप देखोगे कि इंडिया को हेल्प में जापान बहुत हेल्प किए थे। द India was never part of the core conception of the greater go prosperity sphere. ठीक है, the Japanese wanted the British removed and so supported India anti-colonial groups. ठीक है, तो ब्रिटिश को वो रिमूव करना चाहते थे, इसीलिए what they wanted to do, they wanted to support the Indian anti-colonial groups. तो Subhash Chandra Bose actually set up a base there, and there were many, if you see, INA sets up its HQ or headquarters in Rangoon. That is very important. Okay, जहाँ पर बहुत सारे यहाँ पर एस्टिमेटेड 2 मिलियन इंडियंस यहाँ पर अगर आप देखोगे साउथ ईस्ट एशिया में था, जहाँ बहुत सारे फंड्स भी टेक ओवर किया गया था ताकि financially they could have independent, and they raised around $15 million straight dollars in मलयाला अलोन। तो यहाँ पर बहुत अच्छा एक बेस हो गया था। यहाँ पर अगर आप देखोगे द जापानीज वेयर happy to support Indian independence to threaten the British Empire, because if you see, Japanese ko clear threat was from the British or the US. Okay, the British actually colonized almost like half of the part of the world, or more than the half part of the world, by the British people. Okay, so the colonization of India was not part in the greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. Okay, the INA failed in its objective, defeated by a lack of resources but also by disease, yet it had a major impact on the people and British authorities in India. So they had a clear intent of what they wanted to take up. And the last was the INA and the Red Fort trials. Here the Japan's defeat, if you see, after Japan's defeat, the captured INA soldiers were tried in Delhi. They were defended by the leading lawyers and of the Congress and the Muslim League. Okay, so this was during the 1946 thing. The British Viceroy described conditions as on the edge of a volcano. The British fear of the effect of the trials was so strong that the BBC was not allowed to broadcast the INA story as it was seen as highly inflammatory. मतलब ये बहुत ही एक आउट मतलब आउटबस्टिंग एक थिंग था, बट एट दैट मोमेंट ऑफ टाइम देयर वाज अ नेशनलिस्ट सेंटिमेंट एंड देयर वाज अ डू और डाई सिचुएशन एट दैट मोमेंट ऑफ टाइम. The people for INA thing, they used to had a radical effect on the RB's people. So it was a blow to the prestige of the white man that they were actually given a tough fight by the INA people. Okay, so this is about, if you see, INA's impact and the Japan support to the Indian National Army. Okay, so if you see, this was the section 1 of the session for this paper, and we will be doing the section 2 out of this. And if you see, while we were discussing about the question number 4, any 2 were asked out of these 4 questions. If you see, there were 4 and these were around 200 words each. So this was the part 1 of the session. I hope that you have liked the video. Please like, share and subscribe, and please do catch up with our next video, which we will be doing on the next 4 sets of the questions for the June 2020 paper analysis. Thank you so much. Take care.